Alright, that's going to the Bendigo as some knowledge, and it's and I get and Shandia, Gunjuchi, Samakia, and all those in that socialia, Deva, that social Deva, Shalia, Miri Diala Soba, Bendigo, the Samu Kova, Bendigo, Skogu, and the Shishin Javache, the nation how going to Tempati, Delia, and Nimbotian Comiana, the Negi, and the Chige, Semdi, Digi, Yomo, but the Sugar on the Madamache, and the Lucim, Semdi and Ba, Lucine, Shingna, Shin, the Dio on the Sunday, Luma, Java, Delia, Masho, do or essence, using the Negi Shusarida.
Good evening. So last week, we spoke once more in this chapter on vigilance and mindfulness of the need to watch our mind at all times. In particular, last week we spoke about being on guard for the rise of afflictions such as pride, afflictions such as looking down on others, criticizing others, afflictions that lead one to talk badly about others or talk badly to others. So whenever vigilance notices such a mind arising, immediately mindfulness should spring into action, remind oneself of the faults of following the afflictions, and rather call to mind and apply antidotes.
Yeah, that is some of the young Yasi, Yungur, what and I get Yala Soba, and Shali, Gunji, Yala Soba, then Jia, Denegi, Choshi Meba, and then you Yala Soba, and the Sosolia, and Sosu Chotan, Sosu Cholia, Dunga de Yahu Sada, Shandala, the Sosu Magacho, the Ladia, Matiji, Tigo, and Gunji, Yala Soba, Denegi. The Ungur, what and Jeza Dini, that is Chaza, Monzugi, somebody call you your mares, or that somebody to stitch somebody, not your mares. Is it somebody new call you upon the Lamsa, and they are Nimbotian Jepa, Pagaya, and the similar teachers of Matamaje, and the Dushine, the Ore, such as Ungur, that the Angelia Manzugi, no more Berik Chaza, Bango in the Desut by Kimajo, Gao, or Sungo. The Nigi Yomo Bariki Masumba in Anzulia, Rashinigala, Tangaya, Tibetan Savio Benza, and this part Dushin Sungo with that Dushine, and the Dushine, Sembi Sungje, and this Dushine, you want the Matamaje, the Shinajin Duoresi to Sungurvada, Shinajin Duoresi, Tangajilis, Manjugi, Shin to Shashavana. Sujil near Yamakondu studio or what is a dinner some of the current do want to dance Lunga Javana, Rashenigal near than the Divasa, which is another same D want to Matawa Rangi Lunga the tea want to Matawa dinner to Shinteva in the Divasa Mares more rather than another.
The sub part of the text of the chapter that we're on, it's about being aware of one's motivations, so catching one's mind before we've either engaged in a whole train of thought or resulting speech or physical behavior. So we need to be watching our mind, watching to be sure if our mind is in a negative direction or an afflicted direction, criticizing others, looking down on others, talking badly about others. So various expressions of attachment or anger. These are, when one looks closely, one can see when one's mind loses an evenness and equilibrium, but is rather to the side of dissatisfaction, discontent. This comes with complaining, finding fault, and our unhappiness growing. So when we notice this, when vigilance is aware of our motivation being on the negative side, we should, as the text is advising us, remain like a log. In other words, we should return our mind to a steady, stable place, a state that is freed of the afflictions, a state that is at peace, abiding with virtue. And then we should rest there stably, strengthening our habituation to applying antidotes and abiding with virtue, away from these minds of unhappiness that criticize and find fault with others. So this is how, by taking care of our motivation right at the outset of what could be potentially non-virtuous behavior. We rather skillfully return ourselves to the steady, stable abiding with virtue. Continuing in the same vein as what we looked at last week, we come to the 51st verse in the 5th chapter. When desiring material gain, displays of respect, fame, or eagerly striving for attendants and followers, or in the back of your mind longing to be served, at such times rather remain like a log.
Nyamlen chi jege benada sosugi chörup chi nyamlen baru nya chörup chi benada sosulia chi nya barayagi sosulia shandagi sosulia puyagi da denegi gychala zela so nya barayagi tondalia doshine da samlodi denegi nya bala chaba geje chaba doshine nya ba döndu nya yobaina dan di nya bala chaba chagorba o dine za o doshine chaba gebena Bendigo Marissa Dineza, Semlia to Sosuya Samana do Chevache, Sosuya Yamenche, Jegu Benea, the Chel, Jimmy Shadagi, Sosuli Puya, Nyabara did Donunia, never Donunierche, Dusine, Donierche, Dele Chapa Yobena, Dene Yoba Hagosona, Denega and Chapu or the Madame Lamza, Dele, Nyembutia, Nyembutia, and the same day, Denega Chapu or the Madame Wache, and the Goshinji never do it for his consulate, the Nyembu danger, same day. Do you want to never don't do near Chapa, do you want to Madame Wache, do send you to his order?
Looking at the first fault to be on guard against, and that is desiring material gain. So looking at it from the perspective of Dharma practitioners, this is something to be aware of, where we hope to gain something from others as a response to our spiritual endeavors. And this particular expression is hoping for material offerings or material support. This too we need to be on guard against, because it is just yet another expression of attachment. And like various forms of, in various guises of attachment, they are not acceptable. And especially for someone who is a Dharma practitioner who desires to develop the goals of the Dharma within. We need to be on guard against such distortions of our motivation. So again, this section is about analyzing our motivation at the time of action. So we need to be aware of a distortion of our motivation coming from attachment, because it distorts how we relate to others. We end up relating to others not as Dharma practitioners with the motivation, how can I be of benefit to them, but rather, how can they be of benefit to me? So this is part of what we need to be on guard against.
Ana kurdi se da sensol ya kushepche denige shepchu kushepche denezi denelia jichona sembe denezi chongbaina ya worse delia nyen chawaji denige donde nyen delia kurdi chevalia denege kushepche ya dosine 차네 되게 돈도 야와이나 나디한테고 말해지래 진짜 되게 삼로 쉬어베나 제 시신에 다지 되는 거 하고도 남산 tembat에 디 셈니 디원도 마땅하지 아니 연보 된지 되도 가지고 그래서
The second is that of displays of respect. So here too, as Dharma practitioners, this we need to be on guard against. Because it's not only that one's motivation may be distorted by hoping to receive material gain, but also displays of respect. So this too is an expression of attachment we need to be on guard against. Because it's all too natural in society to want to have others to look up to you, to talk well of you, to speak about you in glowing terms. But as a Dharma practitioner, This is yet another expression of attachment. We need to be on guard against this and rather apply an antidote as soon as we see it arise.
Shishing Tani how going to then Jizan Sosola, some of the cold window, some of the that in a Tani, Shishing about how going to Lamsa, Jamba Danger, Delhi, and Nimbo Danger, and Lucian, the assembly, do you want to march over Chichi, Lucian due to much SS.
The third is that of fame or reputation or renown. So this is all too easy also to arise for practitioners, wanting to be spoken of well, thought of well. So this is something we need to be on guard against, because we are striving to gain liberation from all the afflictions. And these are the kinds of expressions, material gain, displays of respect or fame, that practitioners are all too susceptible to. So with vigilance, we need to ensure that our mind is free of such desires. And as soon as vigilance notices such an aspiration for to be spoken of well, or to be respected, or to gain materially, immediately mindfulness should remind us that this is a fault. This is something hindering our liberation, and is in fact our distorted practice is leading to our binds in samsara growing. So immediately then mindfulness should apply antidotes so that our motivation is no longer distorted in this way.
And in that the Niki, the Nyeba la Chaba, the Gurti the Chaba, the Nes Damyanda la Chaba Chiobena, Simdi, the Niki or the Nyembo Timato, Tanga Simdi, do you want to Tanshaba and show and that D Genji, the Nyeba la Chaba, and the D Genji, and the Lungagi, and the Jigim, Jinyabara Tundalia. Damaraja and Junshi ala Sobala, Sosugi, Damyanda, the machine by the Shin Toto Jada, so that the Nigi Jig Miko Hortayala Sobata, the Nigi that Lega Chimambuli, that the Neza, the Shep, the Nijuna, and the Chiktipa Mongoside, Chadogurva, the Neza, do send down body, the next summer cold him into two since Javache, call by themselves how going to. No call Corsaries and begin somehow on the Lamsa Deliane, Jambigi, Nyempotin to a chain, Nyempotin, 70 on the Matanga to do, and Judio Hores, says do not disumor.
As practitioners, having given rise to a wish to be free of samsara, to have a mind liberated from the afflictions, we need to be aware of the guises that attachment will take. The attachment that can deceive us, distorting our motivation and leading us to engage in non-virtue, perhaps because of weak vigilance, without engaging in non-virtue, without even being aware of it. So we need to be on guard against a motivation that is seeking respect, seeking to be spoken of well, to have a good reputation, or to receive material support from others. We need to be on guard against that, because it's not only that the mental fault that follows, but it is likely, if unchecked, to impact our speech or even our physical behavior. And then we can end up deceiving others, praising ourselves, talking about our qualities a bit too much, and deceiving others, having them think we are somehow greater than we are. So these are expressions these are ways that our attachment can all too easily beguile us and thereby end up leading to us deceiving others. We need to be on guard against this. In particular, if we have given rise to a wish to gain freedom from samsara, do not allow ourselves to be led down such a harmful path.
Jigme Tamjan Juma in the Gunska Maradeo, so sugi chama ge mission da ge da ko yapo thomba ne de yapo du sen ko yera sin ko ye di tigor ba bin kurti cha kushep chi ha da de ne ge yo ba da nyung pu yan yo ne ne de chi di chungwa de gyens ke ma ba so sugi kunlong en thone de ne ge sam da we ne gyen ye so ba da de ne shi wa da ne za bin ne ga ju ge do shi ne dai Bendigo, so you the Kuno, so the Nebala child, Dunya, Giada, good daily dinner, should Kushap Rana, Sembe some time, and the Geta Chuna, Sembe some time, did you go, Malaysia?
This needs to be understood well. As a practitioner, if others praise your efforts, there's no fault in them doing that. And if they talk about you to others in a good way, they show you respect, you have a good reputation, there's no fault in that. If others give you material support, perhaps enabling your practice in various ways, there's no fault in that. What you need to, though, be on guard against is your mind seeking these things, because then attachment has arisen and it has impacted your motivation. So even if others relate to you in these ways, showing respect and so forth, and should attachment arise, that itself isn't too much of a problem, as long as you do not allow it to impact your motivation. This is where you need to be on particular guard, because if it impacts your motivation, where you are striving to receive this, or you are treating some in a particular way and others in a different way, in dependence on how they treat you, this is harmful. So we need to understand that for others to relate to ourselves in this way is not in itself a problem. But should attachment arise, we need to deal with it. And we need to be sure our motivation is not tainted by expressions of attachment such as these.
진다원이 코로나 년고 년고 쉬야라 소바 코로나를 쉽지 구십제야라 소바 그런 배야 우리에서 비된 수량을 했다면은 이 코로나 주기 코로나 취 냠내면이 that 가서래 that 거 쉽지 휴행원에다 진다원에다 쓰는 사행 원에 도시는 부여해야 되는데 뒤로 봐 that 양 냠는 자 코로나 부사 가서 코로나 되는 삼다교 말 차이 되는 차바기교 말해서 진짜 되는게 맞아. 야지 어디 남말이야 되는게 그 차바기교 말 되는 연구다 고대다 년달라 되어요 말 등도 지교 말해서 디제변에 안 답아쳐고 말. 그래서 수기 소놈 사이에 돈달라 디제야디 무서지 공원이래.
A genuine spiritual practitioner will receive material support, will have an excellent reputation, and will be a recipient of displays of respect. But the way a genuine practitioner will relate to this is, firstly, it's not something they would be seeking, but when they are the recipients of such, joy may well arise in their mind for the merit that others are accumulating. Joy may well arise in their mind that others are seeing good qualities in people, that they are receiving, that other people are seeing good qualities in others is a reflection of their own good qualities. And also an aspiration will arise in the spiritual practitioner for those who are showing respect to them and so forth, wanting them, like all beings, to spiritually develop, to develop good qualities within them. So this is the kind of response that a genuine practitioner will have. Firstly, they will not be seeking such displays from others, but when it comes, they won't take it personally about themselves, but they will take joy in the virtuous expressions of others and give rise to aspiration. May they spiritually develop. Moreover, throughout this entire process, they will be guarding their mind, aware that at such times, such as others praising them, they need to be on guard against the arisal of afflictions. So this is how genuine practitioners will respond.
donya기 어두신 되네 요걸 차네 되네 요걸 멍부 요걸 걸 멍부도 될래 차 되네기 너는 이디 되네기 주나서 비게 요거보다 걸 멍부 주나서 비 don야 제바이나 아니 지 될래 삼고네 디지고 말해시래 지난 되네 삼고바 하고나 생활을 섬을 디원도 마땅와 제될이야 님보티 되네 지금도 신대비 님보티 이제 섬을 디원도 마땅와 제되도 봐 저거래스 신나신지
The second line, eagerly striving for attendants and followers. This too points to a motivation that has been influenced by attachment. This we need to be on guard against, because this is another way of wanting to be seen in a particular light, wanting to have power and influence over others. So one needs to be on guard against one's motivation, because all too often one's motivation, attachments can influence our motivation, and we can justify something in particular ways. But really, it's attachment that has arisen within us. So when our vigilance notices attachment, we should be like a log, not respond, not eagerly strive to receive attendance or gain attendance and followers, but rather be like a log.
이제 다심 림로 되겨 나서 인 소소게 다게 삼노데 소소리 림로 제겐 직 되네게 림로 제겐에 차비게 차 대지 꿀디세야 되는 도로에 다 림로 세야 되다 소소리야 안지게 도로로 주권 제야라서 봐라 디와 니제스에 제야라서 봐다 지네게 안지게 군예 제야라서 봐 되네 제리 망고 되네 용으로 되네게 림로로 시게 되네게 림로 세 어두시네 델이야 셈디 될이야 차되네 주나 삼비게 되네 제 파차바기네 두스제바나 자는 지금 말해서 되나신 되네 제바이나 아니 삼노드네 고요바이나 되네 아니 템비 시시하고 될이야 템비 임보 된지 셈디 디원도 마땅하지 어느 신주는 내도 가지고 그래서
So too, the third line, in the back of your mind, longing to be served. In the back of the mind relates to all of these. It's about a subtle influence of attachment distorting one's motivation. We need to be on guard against such subtle influences. So this one is longing to be served. This too then is an expression of attachment where we are aware of how others relate to us. So this is quite similar to the first line, displays of respect, where we are aware of how others relate to us, and there's a certain way of being related to that we desire, that we have attachment for. So this would be expressions of wanting others, fulfilling all our needs, ensuring we have adequate clothing and resources, and this mind of attachment arising when we receive such attention. Particular, wanting others to fulfill our needs, serve us immediately as soon as we have a need, almost as if we would snap our fingers and others would run to take care of all our needs. In other words, wanting to be waited on in such a way. So this is quite an overt expression of it, but we need to be aware of the subtler forms arising, how we respond to when others serve us or show us respect. When we notice our mind, attachment arising in our mind, we should rather, as the fourth line says, at such times, we should rather remain like a log. In other words, not respond, not act under the influence of our afflictions.
되네 요야기 냥아체로 주로와다 되네게 진집에 냐 초정아 냠는 지용아 취시 지위여사다 되네게 지위의 민유현디게라 지위여바이나 되네게 다 지소용아야기 냥아체로 주로와다 되네사 가르선에 되네 냥고를 차발이야 90제간 소소라 차세야다 되네 90제가 유바 소소게 야지게라 체로 줘야 줘야와 되네는 코르몽보 빠야지 디와모라 당한 근데 지야 맞은 코르데네 레갈레한라서 받아 되네게 지 코르몽부 되네 되지에나다 되네지다 최시간 몽부 기도 몽부여반다 저가 제배 기도 몽부여다가 bear with get a child and all the nigger to Yala Sobada. Minnesota Rimrich about Jekala sugar and Yesha to take by Nisha to Yara and Subu to Jahara, the nigger Shivishu and Mangurish Chava, the nigger Delia and the Chava Yeche to the Yedu, they do Yahoo said, she's not in it. Or the nigger, then the me. Yangur Chicken, Kuship Chicken, the nigger, Chushan Yovena, Yudigabla, the nigger, some of the Korea in Yangayo Dineza, this is a Jewry, as of more.
What's pointed to in this verse are areas where those in particular who teach the Dharma or are striving to cultivate the Dharma within need to be on guard against. Because these forms of attachment are very common in society and are not necessarily seen as harmful. But for spiritual practitioners, these are, because they distort one's motivation. And that results in a number of faults following, one of which being a favoritism towards how you relate to those who relate to you in a way that fulfills the needs of your attachment. And relating to others who don't relate to you in that same way, you relate to them quite differently. So here we need to be on guard, watching our mind, and be very aware that the fault is not in others being respectful towards the practitioner, or praising the practitioner, or being inspired by the practitioner, or wanting to help the practitioner. There's no fault from others there. The fault comes in the practitioner or the teacher's mind when attachment arises, dividing those who do relate to them in the way they desire and those who do not. So this can be expressed in so many ways. Particular, wanting to be seen in a certain light, wanting to be thought of in a particular way. And one should watch for how one speaks about oneself, one's experience, the good qualities one perceives oneself to have. Because one may well be wanting to be known for these certain things. One may, with this attachment, look at how others are serving you. When I have a need, are there people who want to drive me here and there, and having attachment in relation to how I am being served and looked after. Attachment in relation to how many students I have, how many I have with great reputations, and what that must say about me, therefore. So this, from the practitioner's side or the teacher's side, they need to be on guard against. And again, to be clear, the fault is not being treated in this way, but the fault is the attachment arising. In particular, if that attachment is not identified and dealt with. As soon as it is identified, then we need to be like a log and not allow it to influence one.
There's a Munzilia Junhagi. Tanyura Chagurwa, ordinary. That in it, I shan't do Yawa, that binner, Chike, Shandun Jag, Shan Randun, I shan't do any, JV Gabla, that's some of those corpus cogre, Nimbo can stimble says water. Shandu Yellow Durba tongues, Dorwa tongues, Shandu Yellow Dorwata, Randun Yawa Durba tongue. Mower dubi Simchona, decisions never chas.
These are really things that, afflictions that can arise, or expressions of attachment that can arise all too easily for us. And so too with the next verse, the 52nd verse, which is about a self-centered interest arising and dominating. And this too can arise in a way that is subtle and deceptive. We may be looking for it, but not recognize it. So the 52nd verse, when the mind that disregards the needs of others arises, or the self-centered desire to pursue your own aims, or when the urge to speak arises, at such times rather remain like a log.
예되바나 제 도시의 심주제 되네게 다 소수게 제 투여바디 로버제 투야디 제고로 와다 제세 야와 되고 말해서 고샤샤고 말해서 그러다 되네게 마토바 있나네 제스카요 말 제사 되네션에 야와도 되네게 삼단에 삼로로 지신의 야와 되게 다 지지메 가지 육쇼 삼백에 삼로시 연구여배나 시신의 전시신 제시 전비 시신여고 하고는 남산 전부 된지네 전에 야와도 어디 바템 바 야와도 삼로도 바 가고래서 가고지 삼로 지원도 마땅하지 나교 말해서다 소식이단 제토나 될이야 로직제야다 마주베야다 지게 어다 뭐번에 제투야 삼마도나 다디 육쇼스비 야와도에 삼마데 나교 말해서 님바된 거래서 도시네 가제디 삼마디 원도 나교 말해서 그러다.
The first line, when the mind that disregards the needs of others arises. So this refers to situations where one has the opportunity to help others, when one encounters such an opportunity. But rather than embracing this opportunity, one looks the other way, pretends one hasn't noticed that there is need, or perhaps one even directly declines to help. This we need to guard against. This expression of self-interest we need to guard against. If one can help, one should help. If one cannot help, that's a different story, and there is nothing that one can do. But wherever one can help, one should fulfill the needs of others, help ease their suffering and their burden. Here too, we rely on vigilance guarding against expressions of self-interest, where we're putting our needs before the needs of others. And this specifically refers to instances where others are in need, and we have the capacity to help. So when vigilance notices our self-interest dominating, immediately mindfulness should remind us this is contrary to the Bodhisattva ideal. This is contrary to the person we long to be and have the capacity to be.
소수의 삼문을 다시는 랑된의 현대인이 나니 현대 야와도 랑된 조 주에게 삼문을 코기도 메도 되네기 여바 코와 무수 후여밤 되네 코서에서 삼문 주여바 제 시시하고 해도 남산 템바텐지 오다지고 말해서 템바텐지 예리야 어지 삼문 이원도 당겨 말해시래 코로와 삼문을 삼문 코로와 삼문 땅와 되네 삼문 당겨봐 무슨 삼르디니 기여바 마게나 디네 삼르 계사레스 비 코르사레스 그러다 계사레스 비 삼로지 야 딘디 시신이 하고서나 델리아 템비기 녀 템비기 다 녀버 텐지 오다 삼르디 원도 마땅하지 되고래서 그래.
The second line, the self-centered desire to pursue your own aims. So this is a little different from the first line. Here one is not disregarding the needs of others. Rather, one is placing the fulfillment of one's own needs first and foremost. So one is primarily concerned with fulfilling one's own wishes. So this is an all too common way that beings live. But for ourselves as spiritual practitioners, we need to be on guard against this. And as soon as vigilance notices that we striving forward to fulfill our own aims, then we need to, through vigilance noticing this, mindfulness comes into play, and we make our mind broader and incorporate the needs of others in our endeavors.
현대 쪽을 제지 고거와 이네 자데 데네기 셈바초나 다 지금 말하더니 자다 현대 야와 되어 봤다 나중에 제시 셈모스 잡아 냠는 것을 제 게면나이나 제시 모스 게면나 나중에 데네기 잡아침이 취지 냠는 제알이야 잠니지 깨와리야 아니 냠슬림 봐라 나중에 현대를 제알이야 즉 배 가와다 강투도 제투야 돼서 뭐도 현재 제야를 야와도 아주 삼단교 말해서 다디가 저 투야 말 6쇼세 샤쇼세 되는 삼단교 말 수수강 제투에 임베드 투 건투 그래서 마토베나 어디 인제다 지긴세 몽반다 등 아니고 몽반다 지긴세 베다 제투바 쇼세 몰람으로 자다 되네기 너도시네 제월마다 당은 지마다 아당이 이제 가르치 나셔서 6쇼선 베기 되네기 삼다 야와도 교 말해서 중국어로 와 되네기 지다다 제주시에 냠는 제발라 이 현대야와 현대 쪽으로 지구로 와 라운드 현대 나라진 이기나네 라운드는 파샤지네 현유된 쪽으로 주고로 와 지다데 루시네 냠는 제한조 되네자 고 되네기 용하게 라운드에 삼로 용하게 도고 용서에서 배우나 되네기 파 템바 텐진 뭐 대하다 당아주 되네기 전주심 교회 개면에 당주 신랑신다 신유등이 나네 신뢰로 지대바 조어지 라운드 삼다래 되네기 신뢰 야와도 라운드 삼다교 말해서 콜로 장국을 쓰고 와디니 제바이나 되네기 샘는 디게바네 디 라운드 슈체저로 되니 라운드 두에게 돈아 지어되네 전시야 고하다야 안자마를 제데 되네리 용 라운드 두에게 돈다라
We recognize in these first two lines that what is presented here is contrary to how bodhisattvas live, because bodhisattvas, they are primarily focused on fulfilling the needs of others. And in fact, they are not concerned about the fulfillment of their own needs, because they've understood that others are innumerable, whereas they are only one. They've also understood that others are struggling to experience happiness in cyclic existence, while the bodhisattva's mind is already stable and it abides with wonderful joy. So the bodhisattva, with great ease, focuses on fulfilling the needs of others and is not particularly concerned about their own needs, because it is through fulfilling the needs of others that the bodhisattva recognizes that their needs are fulfilled. So the way for ourselves, who are not yet bodhisattvas, but we do aspire to become so, the way we should relate to this guidance here is that we need to emulate their behavior in accordance with our capacity. So this is an important balance to get, and for each person to find where their balance is in any one time, because it changes over time. But in particular, we should be on guard through vigilance to not disregard the needs of others, to not neglect them or not take care of them. And then in relation to the second line, we should be on guard not to fulfill our own needs first and foremost at the expense of others. This we should be on guard against. We should not leave others as fulfilling the needs of others as an afterthought. Only when I have enough, well, then the abundance can go to others. We should try and be better than that. And moreover, we should, in our endeavors, do so with the aspiration to become like a bodhisattva, recognizing we are not anywhere near their level, so I cannot hold myself to their same high level. So I do the best that I genuinely can, but I aspire to become like them, to become someone who genuinely always puts the needs of others first, and does so with an attitude of joy, not an attitude of look at me, not with an attitude of burden, but with genuine joy. So we hold that as an aspiration. And to serve as inspiration in this, on one hand, we hold in our hearts just the great qualities of the bodhisattva and how wonderful it would be to be like them. So that's a positive impulse. And then on the other side, to be aware that when self-interest dominates, afflictions are not afflictions, non-virtue is likely to follow. Because when our self-interest dominates, that is when we'll easily deceive others, take advantage of others, even lie to others. So we have both impulses of wanting to emulate the bodhisattva, as well as being aware of the faults that follow when our self-interest dominates.
Randun Dundun Yawa Sadi, Tachisa, Randun Dundun Yawa de Jigo Mare, Sisa Dinigina, Jenshin Tianche, and the Dinigit Dundun Yawa de Yoba Hawasuna, Dini Tembag, Nimbo Tianchen, Dini, or somebody, Randun somebody on the Matawache, Dunya somebody on the Matawache, Shinshin, and there were yes, Sungurwada.
And it's vigilance that notices our motivation, recognizes that self-interest or even self-obsession is first and foremost. And then mindfulness reminds us of the faults of such, and we rather place the needs of others in a more dominant position.
And then sometimes so Kalasag, Dundunya, Sosu Dulo, Dundunya, and then Sosu. Nen as Sosu Menjus, Dunya, the round Dunya Roda, Ralia, Dunya, Chesantini Chenatigo, Marives, Chazanka, Rives, Deka, and the Kalarag Maradine, Menjus, never tatu Mara, Hidura, Sambigi, the Nigga answer the Ungura, then some Chezan round Dunya, Marcid, Rangi, Dundadi, some Takio Marcid. Socio Kalas, Kalara, Dunya Mare, Socio Gitachi, Subutitan, Dunya Mare, and this is some sometimes at Dinigi and the young Rodney. This is around the Mare, says to a Patsuba, Socio mentions and Socio Dundadi, rounding so Socio Dundasio, Socio Digi Dunda, Soso and Cabi Dunga say at Dundala Duguaya. And also Dobe Dunga say at Dundala, Kala Saya, Kala Dundu Isaya, Socio Nena the Taya Dundala, and then she mentioned Bishetaya, and then Sosugi, Anti Lobsang Shinyagi Dundala, Lobsang Dundu Yas, it is round in what is round in the Yawa check to us, and this was Jizanjia Maribes, that is just a major, but they do Kuna, Kago Majo, Shinajin in the Kurvets.
Here we need to be very careful we understand the meaning of the Dharma and not go off to an extreme. And I don't say this just as theory. Some people may well have such a misunderstanding. Because the self, they may well misunderstand what a self-centered desire means. Because if one's hungry and wants to eat, one is fulfilling one's own desires. One wants to dress appropriately for this cold weather, so one goes and buys nice warm clothing. But again, one is fulfilling one's own or one's self's desires. Likewise, wanting to get a good education. A good education? Well, is that too not self-interested? Because I'm placing my needs first. I'm making sure I've got enough to eat, I'm appropriately dressed, and I'm educated. I'm putting myself first. So it's quite easy that someone misunderstands in this way. And then they think, well, so now as a good Dharma practitioner, I'm not going to eat well or dress properly or study. Rather, I'm just going to sit here like a piece of wood. And in this way, I'm being a great Dharma practitioner. So it's quite possible someone has such a misunderstanding.
And Yamla Yawachi to go Mariwa, Tineza, Sosugi, Yamlin jail, Ludinji, Yawu, Lusweg, Dondala, Sosugi, Kalasa, Sosu, Suboteta, Trading, Chazana, and Sosugi, that you Lobjong, that San Diego, Tobala, Lubjan Shingo, Chesa, Rani Lubjan Chad, Chesan, or what is so, Disu Machesungo, Randu said, Randu Disu Randu to get Machesungo, Randa, Pine, Sosoli, Reg, Jalash, Yoba, Chiglaya. And then she hands you Rago, and social lago, Nina, that social torch, call him and Alaran Rus, so torch, don't you even? That did Randus. They need some dark marriage. Randa, Shen, Nigan, Shen, but they provide fire direction. I think Alaran Jew, call him and Alara would simply. And then Benny Lobsang Dorje in a musician, call machine that I think him that you sometimes do some dialogue or Jala in that, then the Jiggy and the air toy in that, Unsuki, Jiggy Tamia, Tigarina, or Dusin, Jezadus sometimes, did you go Mares or this called Chabi wants some quarter. Then the Munga the color said, Sosuki, and then Menjuji had a loose head, 소수의 수위 된다라 즉 소수 류내에 된다 소수의 럽장 야부체 냠내제 류내 고고 지산 니 된다라 삼다르 근데 디고 왔다 디 마시는 것도 대투야 거라야 말아 니 디마이 고고 말 디마래 다들 소수의 차바제네 직직션 제라 라오지리 현代신빈의 신도로 지내 탑산하는 신도学呢 딱 현代고도 말하는 내키로 있어야지 내를 지고 선배 삼다지 진짜 당은 숨도 디나데 신도로 学呢 다 파셔들 고에 당한 고에는데 당보 코이키 콜이야 야고래 고 당보 키라 선생이 키와 선배 삼다베는 다디디로 다 콜마지 나가 키로 인다 예랑아 키로 선배 삼다베는 다디 장된된 야와사 장지부 현기 삼다리 파多少钱呢 랑기 돈달 삼다리 디디고 말해서
One notices one's mind going off in such directions, in this or other circumstances or situations, remind yourself with vigilance, we need a balanced approach. Whatever context, we need a balanced approach. And this balance, as one develops spiritually, it shifts. The balance, what is balance for a bodhisattva is quite different than for an ordinary person. But then to come to this specifically, what we should be striving to do is look at, what we should be looking at is the reason behind what we're doing. It's not so much what we do, what we say or what we do, where we look for the expression of self-interest, but in the motivation. So what is the reason behind why we eat, why we dress in a certain way, why we gain an education? Is it out of self-interest primarily, or is it primarily for the sake of being of benefit to others? This is where we look for self-interest, in the motivation. Because what self-interest means is to do something at the expense of others. Self-interest doesn't mean to do something for the sake of others. So if one eats nutritiously for the sake of others, one oneself will eat sufficient food, be healthy food. Likewise, one will dress appropriate for the time of year, but that knowing I need to look after my health so that I can be of benefit to others. And so too with education. So again, self-interest means to do something at the expense of others, not doing something for the sake of others. And in watching our mind, watching our motivation, is be aware of the various ways self-interest can express itself. One would be competitiveness. For example, in study and education, wanting to be first so that you shine, that you gain the praise and the recognition. This expression of competitiveness is self-interest. Or if one has, in a particular field, has knowledge, but one doesn't want to share it with others, one rather wants all the benefits of that knowledge to come to oneself. That is self-interest too. Or likewise, if one has wealth and keeping that for oneself, that's an expression of self-interest as well. And something perhaps more practical is if where self-interest would be shown in the kitchen would be if there's just everyone likes the same fruit, but there's only one piece left, and you take it to yourself, justify it in some way, that's likely to be an expression of self-interest. If you're taking more than your share, or you're putting yourself before the needs of others, that is self-interest. Self-interest, though, can also be expressed by giving it to others and letting it be known that you are giving it to others, or trying to get such a reputation. In other words, doing so in a showy way. This and other expressions of self-interest we need to be on guard against. Rather, the example of the fruit in the kitchen, we share, we take our share, we enjoy our share, we're happy others have theirs, and that's fine. It's relaxed, it's balanced, and it's not trying to push oneself in either extreme.
도고래 세대 소해디 다 돈달라 데니시고 버시다 랑치젠세데 셴야오 되제 랑 셴나랑 이시네 콜레 나랑 소소 게체 제 삼다디 랑치센시로와 랑지진다. 데니게다 랑된의 신기는 코르 랑기된의 계체제 삼다디 랑된사죠. 어디 전주 심념을 제알라 디지요 말시다다. 데네 저기 남시 정말실에 차빈빈도 차디비나다. 데니게 도도디비나다. 데니기 미니 여베나 다 소소리아직 사로 되셔베나 다 소소게 랑지진 삼다 랑제바 진바다. 랑든 체와 삼다나 오당 알아서시는 알아 지수부탕아 연구에 지마나 연구에 선배 삼다야다 두 삼다베네 가져디야 하고를 콜야와 되지 콜 가요마 콜 저도네 갈래선에다 나라마신 지금 선배 삼단 랑을 제바진 제진데 현기 야와更加的 야와 되지 랑을 제바진데 디지고 말에 디 랑기 된데 좀나 디지고 말에 제가 되는사 디니칼라 니가 저도도 베네 소소 사이콜메 소사이베네 콜에 도도가 어찌바다 야나 소소 차상 콜에 안처럼 자로시스고 랑게 강아디 파 체수에제 콜에 강아디 세게 탑시다야 디야쇼디데스 지단 디치고 그래서 디네기 마주베나 다디 이 kopshigevne koyo kangade seyadono de gahemen chen ba che se kopshigevena de ko kangade samta sigoro ba sizen dine samata je ko joda kale khana gayo marda narang gechegire samje rang samta de rangjisin di rangjisin da rangi donda de geche samta du je de rang de dunye o dine samle de ta kyo ma les sizen chen yusin bi nyamne che de di sambo de panghu wo di gyune chen yusin ba le yo yongo mardi 엄마는 인지 냠내지도 갑는데 봐도 도로고 제가 제주신 비교라 랑지징에 삼로되요 말에 랑된 삼로되도 스타교 말세디 디스티니스 삼로되고 고고를
What Shantideva is so skillfully introducing to us here in the sections on ethical restraint will later in the parts of training in bodhicitta be brought up again and amplified. So this is our foundation for later to be able to really generate bodhicitta. What we see here is that this is laying the foundation for the key bodhisattva training in striving to develop the other cherishing mind and abandon the self-cherishing mind. For the bodhisattva, this is of primary focus. The primary focus in the ethics is to ensure that self-interest isn't influencing them, that the bodhisattva is guarding their mind, their ethics from self-interest. Bodhisattva sees it as incredibly important to ensure the needs of all are fulfilled, recognizing that self-interest or self-cherishing is wanting to have one's own needs fulfilled first and foremost, seeing the fulfillment of our needs as being of primary importance. Others, after is fine, but I have to have my share first. This is what the Bodhisattva guards against. So now we should be watching for this, trying to develop it too. So for example, when the weather is like this, it's quite cold, and one's often quite hungry. In particular, we want to eat or drink something warm to give heat and wear something warm. But let's say there's insufficient warm food and warm clothing. Then the self-interested person will ensure that their needs are fulfilled. And they will come up with justification. They'll have many reasons why they should be eating this food and wearing this clothing, why it should be them and not someone else. But the practitioner will rather take a more skillful approach, recognizing they and someone else also has the same need. So they'll rather share the food, share the clothing in some way, so that both benefit. Or if genuinely, again, with a balanced approach, they recognize the need of the other is greater than theirs, they will readily give it all to them. So whether they're giving all to the other person or whether they are sharing, the way they do so as a practitioner developing the other cherishing mind is that they'll share with joy. They won't share with a sense of loss, or they'll give to the other with joy and without a sense of loss. And there'll be no need for needing to be recognized or praised for their generosity. Rather, the joy will come in soothing the suffering of others.
Geshe Thubten Rabten Rang Jisin Dorje Samdan Song de Jizan Samna la Kashi Samna la Rang Jisin Dorje Rang Lia and Jeba Mazin Rang Lia and Be Tongchon Daya Rangi Dunda Kamajin that Jechu Mara said they take him in the Sambig Samna la Maho Samna Machuba Yungor Vajana. So the Rang Jisin Dorje said Rang Yao Rang Jeba Simbas and Rang Yagure said the samdagyo ma legyo marwa rang yakure sosu gi nyamne je pe yakure se sosu gi nyamne je ne sosu rang gi rang le ya ngan pe yaku chung so rang ngi din nyamne je pe yaku de sa di sosu rang gi bo bo ji wa di ge chen bo wa ji za din sa sosu gi nyamne je ba lo ngi lu din de yaku thang bo ji go gu le da din ne za de lu din de da bo yaku le sa de ji za你先里判断主要里啊，所属旅店的药物大部交了，所属个安几个没药物马上把那汤过药物没完那个先里判断出土马的身边，三大其实但先让这把因为其实多过来些的，让了药物三大的当交嘛来交嘛等等的地方，其实的那个开始个都是三大，让这把这边。其实几个嘛的，甚至让了药物些三大交嘛的，那让给。don ta le gyun ju ge sam ta ge ma se go do di go ne ko lo ti go di ma de che sa rang ji rang ni an de ji tar ba da tham ji ke be ko ba to ba la ya rang ni an de ji su bo de ta da an de tun jin de ge an ji ma chang wa de go go lo ba ji sa xian le pan do che ba rang ni de ta da rang ni yuan de xie ba ji yuan de pu zong chuo bo ye ba go go lo ba ji sa di rang ni ya bu go ye de go ye de ji sa rang ni le de ne ge ya bu ju ye de so su ge 고해기 된다래 비수 제고로 지 야고 중나스 딩 될래 양아 시엔딘의 중국 중나가 수고되다 중나 선배 섬로디 이 고고로 받아 제가 디니치를 랑치슨 도르세스 생거 말에 제가 랑리 제바 심벌로 도르세스 디 숨고 말에 제가 디 고고래 디 매나 아주 이게 냠는 제투 말와 디네 자다 랑치슨 도르세스 랑의 디진이 주바나지 랑다 현이나 삼다도 랑기 된다데 계체지 현이야와도 현이 삼마다 디 랑기 된다 계체 삼다 디다교 말이스 거다 제가 디다교 말이스 다른 아주 전주 심배 냠는 제도 랑류 쳐야다 랑기 안에 수부 대단 용화야다 랑기 안지 제 수부 대단 용화도 칼라 된도냐다 세계팅야 로서 쳐서 디 랑기 디기 용화디 데니기 야고 용화디 현이 된다 지고래 현이 판도 제발라 디 튕길 마서는 이렇게 benengazo jalal ma son di bejuna di gudu was 제가 현래 판도지 di 구 제가 di 야고 제고 di 야고 당에 자고 있습니다. 제가 랑기 수보 야고 탕고 차야 최대 야고 요야 소수기 롭종시야 내내기 안에 곰 내내기 소수기 안에 주 롭종 야줘야 do sometimes 현이 된다 지고다 현이 미유디 현래 판도주야 된다 베지다야 된다라 안도 지고래 지나 당 하나 쪽에 가서 현기 판도 주야 만바체 소수게 되네 야고 좀은 현래 소소 자 차야 된다 소소 야를 차야 된다 섬던 거로 어디 섬당요 말해서 랑지신 유로디 고교 방고래서 디리 지사데 랑지심반게 랑든 지교 말 랑지신 섬도디 도고래서 섬당 라외도 랑래 야고 지교 말 양을 야고래 섬교 말 랑기 안 최된 야고야 된다 랑래야 안도 지교 말서 디 랍교 말 된다 딜고교 말다 안딜고 해긴 냥아요래.
So this presentation on abandoning the self-cherishing mind, because this is what Bodhisattvas do. They disregard the self-cherishing mind. They disregard their own needs first. This presentation needs to be understood very well, because it is a source of potential misunderstanding. And then from this misunderstanding, a negative attitude towards the Bodhisattva path, the Bodhisattva method, can arise. Because someone hearing about the presentation on disregarding one's own needs and placing the needs of others first and foremost may hear this as, so I'm supposed to ignore my own needs? This would be a misunderstanding. Also, someone who has quite a negative self-view may, and therefore naturally does things for others first at their own expense, they may think of themselves as, well, I suppose this must be bodhisattva action. But they actually have an unbalanced view of themselves, a negative view of themselves. So this too would be a misunderstanding. So the meaning of the bodhisattva ignoring their own needs and placing the needs of others first is not that the bodhisattva is looking down on themselves or seeing themselves as unworthy and others as worthy of their time and energy. This is not the case at all. For the practitioner to have become an actual bodhisattva, they would have been training in all the preceding steps. And through that, they would have come to understand suffering and its origin, as well as the path to liberation from suffering. And through that extensive experience, they would have, through that extensive training, they would have gained extensive experience with their own mind in transforming problems, in dealing with hardships, and recognizing they can deal with hardships skillfully. There's the practitioner. They are not easily overwhelmed by life's hardships. In fact, the hardships of life, they are now starting to use as fuel to be of benefit for others. This is the class of practitioner who genuinely places the needs of others first and foremost, because they know they can deal with hardships. They have confidence that by placing the needs of others first, they're not going to go without, in the sense of gaining experiencing hardships. They know they have good control over their mind. They have the mental strength and capacity, therefore, to help others, to place the needs of others first. They know life's hardships are not likely to overwhelm them because they have such experience of skillfully dealing with their mind in a variety of challenging circumstances. Moreover, the practitioner has as their actual goal, not just as a mere expression of words, their actual goal is to become a Buddha for the sake of others. To become a Buddha for the sake of others, they know they need a number of excellent conditions to come together. They need physical health, they need access to teachers, and access to being able to develop their minds and to help others. So they need many circumstances. And if they ignore their own needs to the extent they do physical harm to themselves, this is foolish. They are limiting their capacity to be of benefit to others. This skillful practitioner does not deprive themselves for the sake of others. Rather, by helping others first, they nourish themselves. They are able to navigate this balance very well between placing the needs of others and thereby being nourished by that, not being neglected. So bodhisattvas, they do not harm themselves or push themselves beyond their capacity. Rather, when bodhisattvas engage in these incredible feats, and we hear about these or read about them, we should understand they are acting within their capacity. This is an expression of just how far they have developed themselves. So therefore, they are not acting in unskillful ways, going beyond their capacity, getting exhausted, harming themselves. Rather, they have a good understanding of their mind and their capacity, and they are helping others in accordance with this great capacity they have developed. Moreover, they have through their understanding of reality, a clear understanding of their own capacity. They do not limit themselves in the way that we do, because by seeing themselves like we see ourselves as far less capable than we are, we may well have a view of seeing ourselves as lesser than we are. Bodhisattvas have a far more realistic understanding because of their wisdom. So these are remarkable beings, and they practice, therefore, in ways which are quite extraordinary to beings such as ourselves. We are very different from them. We should understand this difference but emulate them in the sense of coming to know who we actually are and pushing ourselves that little bit further to put the needs of others first, to deal with our mind so that it is not overwhelmed by life's challenges and difficulties, and recognize that doing this from time to time, we can use it as fuel, use it to strengthen our resolve, to recognize more clearly our own capacity, and to do so without wanting to be praised, without wanting to be known for what we are doing, to put that aside and leave that as our past, but in our present and our future to help others, but to do so in a way that is not ostentatious, in a way where we are guarding our mind from what we saw earlier, from wanting praise and recognition, but doing it because others matter, because we value them. And that is sufficient.
ngarang yu nyomo ba chasa panggo gudu pangbe bacha de jeba pangbe pangba togudu ngarang gyule chedam ji onson de tarchi bi yishi de togudu sembe donnu ya jorwa di togu sembe jiso soso yakko chawo sembe samlo de ba de jisan di yende nyomo ba bacha de jebe pangbe pangba de chedam ji onson de ba tarchi bi kimbe yishi de da nge gyule togudu jisan nge gyu nyomo bacha de jeba panggo gudu sembe de nege donyer gi dumba de yore jisan rangdun tar 친구고 rangdun tar machinda rangi 된다데 소수기 녀모바 빵 곰게 곰 tar machinda rangdun tar machin 바로와 rangdun tar machinda 산요고바 토야메 산요고바 마도네 신진 푸는 소바 지토에 메바네 데엔자 rangdun tar 친바라 랑기기 녀모바 바샤데 제바 빵고고래 최는 랑기기 셰바디 최는 온선도 탈치 메시디 차고고래 데엔자다 rangdun tar 친구 rangdun tar 친바다 rangdun 된되니 많이나 타체지 지징 말도 되냐면은 디자 내가 레기 말와 디토베게 된데 비지고 말와 제산디 제주심비규라 란든 되냐로 여러 말서 여레스 네 가르여서네 라니 녀모 바샤다 집에 빵비 빵비 토베게 되냐 듬바 여레 라니 아니 최규기 최탐지 원수 탈지미시 토베게 되냐 듬바 여레 디 라니 랑든 랑이 된는 예비 랑이 야고 차야기 된는 예비 듬바리 랑든 듬바레스 디요레스 다다는 디나르데 주주나르데 랑든 유열네 지시주와레 준비 디 송도아 랑든 되냐기 삼노단데 디 땅교 마레스 가차도아 결혼된 노주레 샤람나 디 제제서 랑든 세야디 랑든 세야디 현대 랑다 현대이 나네 현대 파 현기 치도 마연바 아니 렌현 야와 되시 소수기 donda juye samno jangdo disi orese dichi gyo maraso orese dingi kyaba orese shida namjinga de chigming jiba imbala rando de lo se de goyo de kabla da chigdi rando de lo jila de donda la samda rani de lo de la ni hudwa rani bene tarbada tamje semje tamjige donda la rani ane nyomo bacha da jeba ba rani yenda tarchimba che samda ren de rando de ya sam shengi chedo rani de 랑기 야고차에 돈이 해야지 딩한테 고고르와 다 대야지 랑다 현이나네 현례도 소소히 제바진제 소소히 현례 소소히 야가 삼다 현이 된다 말면 소소 현례 소소히 야가 차에 돈이 해야지 여러분 어디 돈이디라 랑데 돈이디 방고르 디딩한테 냠는 지겨 말 바방고르에서 디송고르 다디디 랑데 돈이로 되바다 해야 돼
two different ways to understand the first and second line. So the one way is as has been presented. So for ordinary practitioners, those like ourselves who aspire for the bodhisattva paths, as well as newer bodhisattvas, they need to be on guard of a self-centered desire to pursue their own aims. And for us, this certainly is far bigger of an issue. In fact, this is our normal everyday way of being, as well as disregarding the needs of others. And for bodhisattvas, by the time there are actual bodhisattvas, they're not going to have much of an obstacle in this way because they have generated bodhicitta. But they will be, nevertheless, on guard of any self-interested desire to pursue their own aims or disregarding the needs of others. But for actual bodhisattvas, these expressions are unlikely, whereas for us, they are quite common, or second nature, you could say. But so this is, as I've explained it thus far. This then can lead to a question, and that will come to the second way it can be explained. The question would be, because let's put it this way. So what I've translated in the first line, that discards the needs of others, can be translated as for the benefit of others. For the benefit of others. And the second line, the self-centered desire to pursue your own aims, that can be the desire to fulfill your own aims. So it's a different way to translate it. So where now in the second explanation, where these terms will be heard, is bodhisattvas both strive for their own interest, the second line, and they strive for the interest of others. So that is a different way to translate these two lines. The second line, striving for their own interest, and the first line of striving for the interest of others. So the interest of others for a bodhisattva, this is quite clear. But the interest of their own self-interest, bodhisattvas actually do strive for their own self-interest. Or for their own benefits is more literal, striving for their own benefit. So this refers to that enlightenment or Buddhahood is attained for self and others, for oneself and others. So the bodhisattva is striving for their own interest in that they are striving to abandon their own afflictions together with their seeds and imprints in order to give rise to the wisdom minds of the Buddha, the omniscient wisdom minds of a Buddha. So this is the pursuit of their own self-interest for their own, or to express it differently, their own benefit. And their own benefit is the abandonment of their own afflictions together with their seeds and imprints in order to gain the omniscient wisdom, exalted wisdom of Buddhas. But whilst they are striving for that, for their own interest, their motivation for that is so that with this omniscient consciousness, they can help others. They can relate to others perfectly in accordance with their own disposition and inclinations. So others benefit too from the bodhisattva's attainment of their own self-interest or the fulfillment of their own benefit. So this then is a second way that this could be understood. So the Tibetan words are the same. So the way in other contexts you'll hear it is striving for the wisdom minds of the Buddha, is the expression of their own benefits, and the benefit of others is for the bodies of the Buddha.
All those in around the some loss, now each head to other this year. In either that the Maori do be sim juna in decisions in never just and that the number in the rich is not Shendu Yawa do some luna Shendu Yawa do rounding Yawa to the round and the chair rounding Druber do be rounding done near some of you, the nigger some coroner, the niddy dondalia and pa to pa Gishe so but the nigger some of you by now or do sin the pa and the Masheva chair and do sin the shin to near or when that round Shendu Yawa do as a during the some of Guinea. Or that it is usually Shehomare, Rochomare, says the Shed Yungurua, and the Neagic Randu Shangi, Shender, the Randunian, and so Randu Dunya, Shendu Yawadan, Social Rad, and all that did Nalpanda Shade, Maliki Chegar, Magis, Gigi Roche, Ninja was the Nigger, Bama de Baju, that Sosuga Raya Dondala, and the Chiki Shashur, or the some of the Shikyo, some Mawa Duba, 되베 되네게 삼다 시에게 삼로를 코버는 시교 말에스 제자데 르샨드 야와 되바다 랑드 야와 되네 랑드 되는 야와 되바 되베 삼나 깨와다 니 랑드 되는 예기 다 디투비에게 된다야 아니 계시시에게 되바로 시대시에면 어두 마셔바지 되는 님보때 심디 와도 마다마 님보때 제텔이야 원님보때 투제는 디와도 마다와지 신신의 야바 신난신제 뭐 와도 마송하지 네토바지 오래서
In the third line, when the urge to speak arises, this should be understood in the light of the above two lines, in terms of when the urge to speak arises, and that speech may well disregard the needs of others, then rather say nothing. Whereas if the urge to speak arises, which is actually wanting to be of benefit to others, then one should speak. And the second line, if the urge to speak arises, but in a way that is self-centered or self-interested, again, here one should stay silent. So the Bodhisattva, and in our case, the aspirant to the Bodhisattva paths, they should speak to benefit others. They should not stay silent when their speech would benefit others. But when their speech is either in self-interest or could bring harm, silence should be followed. So if one chooses to stay silent when saying something would help, this is a mistake. So we should understand this third line clearly. When our advice when our advice is sought and we have something to say that will help, we should give it. Otherwise, if our advice isn't sought, or we're talking from a position of self-interest, we should rather stay silent. And likewise, with our speech, when it can bring benefit to others, for example, encourage them in virtue or help them to ease their suffering, then we should speak.
베게디나 용초조로 내가 전부 뭐로 내내자 내내게 냠는 시간 중에 다도 시간 가지고 되네 다 나상산에 되네 삼모고 녀래는 가지고 어두 삼는 지진행의 gün에 땅미아 선배기 되니신다 다 지게 되네 삼 코라 중요 된 지가 말해서 되네게 삼로 다나되기 봐 염유는 가지고 시나 하고 같이 되네 삼단의 균 되네래 되네 야고요 말해서 비균으로 통한 마음바에 되네 삼 코라선 되게 년버된 두 바치 인 선배기다 가지고 게디네 되네기 삼로 땅고 여러 하다는데 안두시네 담다 되네게다 두시네 삼다다 되네게다 소소 삼로나 되네게 담대서 코고되면서 두시네 대시신 기파 셰비시신 제 되네기 삼로 코고서 코여 받아 이나 안데 템바 템베 땡지데 마가야다 다 되는 것을 코면 되네 코여게 삼로 기에게 냥아로 통배네 남상 템베tin 어두디긴 지요 말해서 두시네 뭐 땡지 가실에 아서 nyumo ba samlo desu yo wando dang ma dang wa che ne ne so ba chi ko re es sa de desu samlo desu ne nyumo ba re dini che ne di yu ang ge ane le ga ne chan le ne bi ge ja wa mong wo le ne wa di ba mong bo sa yu cha ge re es sa desu da ma zu ya ne ma zu du nga ge da ra jin ni ga la du nga yo ye ge ga nga yo ye ge di ba sa ye ge samlo de ge re desu ba ga wo re es to na desu mo lo da.
Briefly summarize what we've looked at tonight is through this presentation, hopefully you've come to recognize just how often our mind is motivated by self-interest, by our own self-obsession. And we need to recognize that this only leads to faults. It leads us to push others aside. It leads us to push ourselves forward. And this is contrary to the Bodhisattva ideal that we long to live in accordance with. So we need to rely on mindfulness and vigilance to guard our mind against this. And for this to come about effectively, we need vigilance to at all times be watching our mind. And for our mindfulness to be effective, we need to have reflected well on these and the preceding points so that when we recognize that we are seeking something from our relationships or our interactions with others, whether it's material gain or to be treated in a certain way, that be shown respect politeness, expecting this, being unhappy when we don't receive it, being concerned about our reputation, and so forth. And we should be aware of such a motivation or such an influence of our motivation. When it arises, remain like a log. To remain like a log, to not respond, requires these two components: vigilance, to notice. Mindfulness then, through having reflected well, mindfulness will remind us that this is a self-interested motivation, and that is only harmful. I must not respond. I must rather apply an antidote, remind myself of the qualities of the other person, remind myself of their needs, and place their needs before my own. So in this way, we can, by following Shantideva's advice, remaining like a log, not having our motivation influenced by the afflictions, including subtle ones such as these, we abandon non-virtue and we strengthen our habituation to wholesome, virtuous ways of thinking. Then thank you. Then that concludes our 100th session of Shantideva's text together. So there's plenty to dedicate. Thank you very much.